Hello and welcome to Inside Politics. My name is Anastasiya Lavrina. So, tensions in the Middle East and uncertainty affected traditional trade and energy routes. Global attention is increasingly turning to alternative corridors connecting Asia and Europe. Against this backdrop, the South Caucasus is emerging as a region of growing strategic importance. Armenia's recent parliamentary elections have produced a clear political outcome, but they have also raised broader questions about the future of regional security, connectivity and geopolitical alignment. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has secured a new mandate at a time when Armenia continues to redefine its foreign policy priorities. Relations with Russia remain under strain and efforts to finalize a peace agreement with Azerbaijan remain high on the regional agenda. At the same time, projects such as the Middle Corridor and the TRIP or Zangezur Corridor are attracting growing international attention as governments and businesses look for reliable routes linking Europe and Asia. What do these election results mean for Armenia's future? And what role could the South Caucasus play in a rapidly changing Eurasian landscape? These are the questions we will discuss today on Inside Politics. And joining me now is a former diplomat, Matthew Bryza. Hello, Matthew, and welcome to Inside Politics.
Hi, Anastasia. Great to be back with you.
Great to see you today with us here. So let's begin with the economic impact. Since the outbreak of hostilities between Israel and Iran, then United States, oil prices have reacted sharply. Taking into account your broad experience in the energy field, how concerned are markets about the possibility of a wider regional conflict, and what are the key factors currently driving price volatility?
Well, oil prices initially went up very sharply when the Strait of Hormuz was first closed, and they went up as high as about $126 per barrel. But in recent days, as rumors have been circulating and suggestions by President Trump have been circulating that there could be a memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States, then the price dropped. So on Friday, the oil price was dropping to around $90 per barrel after kind of hovering around $100. So I think a lot of analysts, myself included, expected or anticipate that there could still be much higher prices. Until now, prices have been kept relatively moderate because there had been such an oversupply of global oil markets for a couple of years. And a lot of oil then had been in storage on land and in tankers on the sea. But since February 28th, or actually since early March, when Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, those surplus stocks of oil have been drawn upon, as well as strategic petroleum reserves in the United States and other major countries. And so all that extra oil is now being consumed, and soon there will be no more of that extra oil. So if there is not an agreement within, very soon between Iran and the United States that holds, that offers confidence to insurers and owners of oil tankers that the strait is safe for transit, then I think we risk seeing a very sharp, much higher increase in oil prices that could disrupt the global economy.
Matthew, even if hostilities stop, will oil markets immediately stabilize, or has the region entered a period of prolonged uncertainty?
It's not clear. As I was suggesting before, for there to be confidence among the shippers and insurers of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, there will need to be confidence that Iran is not going to attack those ships. And so if the Strait of Hormuz immediately has all restrictions imposed by Iran, and of course the United States blockade also removed, some shippers of oil will use their ships to transit the strait, and there are some shipping companies who have deployed a relatively large number of tankers to be just outside of the Strait of Hormuz in the Gulf of Oman, waiting for the announcement that there's an agreement in place.
Well, but historically, how long does it take usually for energy markets to return to normal after a major geopolitical shock?
Well, to finish up, what I was saying is that nobody knows how quickly shippers will be willing to restore tanker traffic to where it was before Iran closed the strait, because it's impossible to predict when the shippers, the owners of the ships, I mean, and the insurers of those ships will be confident that Iran won't attack them if there's another increase in tension between the U.S. and Iran. So there's no formula for that. It's a psychological question, but a few weeks of safe travel through the strait should be enough for the tanker flows to increase again. Yeah, already, as I said before, the oil price has decreased significantly from the peak of $126 several weeks ago. So I think that oil traders are anticipating that the oil market is going to now get back to, quote unquote, to normal. But there's no hard and fast rule as to how long it takes. Every supply disruption is unique. And this is the biggest supply disruption in the history of oil. And, the Strait of Hormuz in recorded human history has never been shut like the Iranians have done here. So there's no normal.
So we can say confidently that now what investors are more caring about, it's not whether the fighting stops, but whether there is a confidence that it will not resume, right?
Yeah, and whether that, and they're not it's not the investors so much as the owners of ships and the insurers, and whether they are confident that Iran won't attack them. And if the U.S. and Iran are hitting each other with missile strikes or whatever other weaponry, but Iran does not close the Strait of Hormuz, then the shipments of tankers will keep going. But as Iran has learned, this is the first time, as I said, the Strait of Hormuz has ever been closed, and Iran has seen this as a very useful geopolitical weapon. So if the fighting resumes, I think Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz again and will threaten tankers again.
Absolutely. So over the past weeks, during the tensions between Iran and the United States, it has once again raised concern about the security of traditional trade and energy routes across the Middle East. And international attention has increasingly focused on alternative corridors linking Asia and Europe. In this context, has the strategic value of the South Caucasus changed fundamentally? How do you think?
No, I don't think so. Maybe in a negative way, because there were a couple of missile attacks on Azerbaijan, including in Nakhchivan. Iran has been supplied, apparently, via the Caspian Sea when in response to the U.S. blockade. So I don't think that the greater Caspian region has fully escaped unscathed from the damaged reputations of security of transit routes, number one. Number two, there's been strong interest in the so-called Middle Corridor, and now in the new complement to the Middle Corridor, thanks to the end of the Second Karabakh War and the Trump Road for International Peace and Prosperity, and plans to expand it into and across Nakhchivan to Turkey. So that's something that the Trump administration and, of course, Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey and the Central Asian countries have long been interested in, independently of what happened in the Gulf. Finally, the marginal increase in cargo or energy flows through this new corridor or through the Middle Corridor can really do very little in terms of increased flows compared to the enormous impact of cutting off the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, 20% of the world's crude oil supplies move through the strait. And so, the Middle Corridor can't compete with that. But that's not relevant. What matters is that the new corridor, that President Aliyev, Prime Minister Pashinyan, President Trump have all been working on together with President Erdogan and President Tokayev, that is something that can form the foundation for a lasting peace, and then a means of getting much more investment to the whole region along the corridor.
So can we say that the Zangezur corridor or TRIP become even more important as part of a resilient East-West connectivity network?
Yeah, I mean, it is part of that East-West connectivity network. So, it's sort of circular argument, right? As this new transit link comes into play, then more and more people are going to look the overall corridor, including the routes via Azerbaijan and Georgia, as attractive and reliable, and they'll want to ship even more cargo through them.
Armenia's election, which took place against the backdrop of strained relations with Russia and growing engagement with the European Union, also ongoing peace negotiations with Azerbaijan. So to what extent was this election really a so-called referendum on Armenia's future geopolitical orientation?
I think entirely. I think it's difficult to overstate how significant this psychological and geopolitical shift is in Armenia's electorate, with 49.8% of the voters, or of the vote, being in favor of Prime Minister Pashinyan's embrace of Azerbaijan and peace, and Pashinyan's reorientation of Armenia away from being totally dependent on Russia as a protector against perceived Turkic threats from Turkey and Azerbaijan, to a partnership with Azerbaijan and Turkey and with the European Union. Now, we should be careful. This is not a repudiation of Armenia's strong relations with Russia. Armenia's economy is very dependent on relations with Russia. I mean, Russia or Russian entities own Armenia's railways and energy infrastructure. But I think that there's a powerful shift in the optimism of the Armenian electorate toward not needing to require that Russia be there as a protector, but against countries to the east and west that Armenian voters are now looking at as potential partners and even friends. And, as President Aliyev has said, even before the peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia is signed, which requires an amendment to Armenia's constitution, according to President Aliyev, Azerbaijan and Armenia already exist in a state of peace. So I think that 49.8% of the Armenian voters who voted for Pashinyan were voting for this continued state of peace with Azerbaijan.
But there is still some figures who are not so much in favor of the peace deal to be signed between two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan. So how do you see this process within Armenia itself? Do you think they still have the power to affect the process?
Yeah, 50% of the electorate voted for Pashinyan and 50% did not. So that would suggest that about as evenly as can be divided, half of Armenia's population wants peace with Azerbaijan and half isn't sure that it wants peace with Azerbaijan. We know that there has been a massive disinformation campaign by Russia, filled with its usual lies in elections, claiming Pashinyan was dying of cancer or AIDS, and that Armenia was going to suffer all sorts of economic and political threats and hardship if it embraced peace with Azerbaijan and looks toward Europe as a new partner and Turkey as a new partner. The Russian side, even as we know, imposed cutoffs of agricultural products, including roses, from Armenia to Russia, and all sorts of other embargoes. So I think that failed. Russia tried to intimidate Armenia's voters, and an unprecedented number of Armenians voted in favor of a new path. Again, not for confrontation with Russia, but for oxygen, for freedom from Russia's dominance. And that is an extremely powerful change. But you're right that half of the Armenian population did not vote in that direction. So in terms of solidifying peace with Azerbaijan, as long as Azerbaijan insists that Armenia amend its constitution to remove a reference to possible unification of what is called Nagorno-Karabakh by the constitution with Armenia, which calls into question Armenia's recognition of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, then there won't be a peace treaty if that amendment doesn't happen, if Azerbaijan sticks by its insistence. But securing that sort of a constitutional amendment will be very difficult for Pashinyan politically. His civil conference party does not have a contract party. Does not have the constitutional majority, a two-thirds majority that it needs, which would be 70 seats out of the 105 rather than the 64 it obtained, to initiate the national referendum required for such a constitutional amendment to move forward. So this is going to be a complicating factor in the effort to finalize a peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia, as long as Azerbaijan insists on that constitutional amendment. Now, the Armenian side and Pashinyan said, well, there are things the Constitutional Court of Armenia could do to address Azerbaijan's concern as well. So I would guess that Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Aliyev will discuss this issue in great detail soon.
With the participation of the United States, most probably, as Donald Trump himself is so much keen to see the peaceful coexistence in the region of the South Caucasus?
I don't think so. I don't think that either President Aliyev or Prime Minister Pashinyan want any mediator involved at all. They've made that clear. And I don't think President Trump, to be honest, has the patience or the interest or the background intellectually to be able to play a mediating role. No, that's really unlikely. What the Trump administration does care very much about, though, is that there be peace arranged by the parties themselves, and that there be opportunities for U.S. investment in the corridor we were talking about, and also in securing new supplies of critical minerals, much of which will come from Central Asia, some of which will come from Azerbaijan, and can be processed in Azerbaijan at the new Elat Free Economic Zone, and then would use the new transportation corridor to move those critical minerals into reliable supply chains on which the United States and its allies could rely. That's what the Trump administration really cares about. But to realize that vision, Azerbaijan and Armenia are going to have to work out the peace treaty themselves, I think.
Matthew, previously you mentioned a very important point, the division within the Armenian society. Is it more about those who are in favor of peace with Azerbaijan and Turkey and those who are against, or it's the division in between of those who are willing to have more pro-Western orientation and foreign policy of Armenian government and those who are in favor of Russia?
Well, it's impossible for us sitting here to know. Right? I haven't seen such sort of granular public opinion polling. But it's clear that some Armenian voters who didn't vote for Pashinyan, as you say, are not comfortable with peace with Azerbaijan. And that goes hand in hand with not wanting to be so dependent on Russia and being afraid of what it would mean to move toward the European Union. Maybe some voters are okay with peace with Azerbaijan, but again, are worried about what the economic consequences would be of having a less close relationship with Russia. I suppose both of those factors you mentioned are in play.
Again, Moscow has repeatedly signaled concern over Armenia's growing engagement with Western institutions, while Brussels, let's say, has expanded political and economic cooperation with Yerevan. So in this particular situation, is Armenia attempting to balance between different centers of power? And if it does, then there is a possibility for such kind of policy Armenia can balance or not? And is it gradually making a strategic choice in between of the West and Russia?
Yeah, that's what I already said, that Armenia and Armenians, they voted for closer ties with Europe, but not for alienation from Russia, right? They realize that their economy is highly intertwined with Russia's. They don't want confrontation with Russia. Based on all of my experience inside of Armenia as a U.S. diplomat, Armenians welcome economic prosperity that it comes from their relationship with Russia, but they've, for decades wanted a multi-vector foreign policy. Even when Sarkisyan was president of Armenia, he talked about a multi-vector foreign policy as well, which meant, having a strong baseline relationship with Russia, but also having improving relations with Europe and the United States. And I just think now where Armenia is, it now has moved even further and more strongly to wanting those good relations with Europe and the U.S. in addition to good relations with Russia. So it's not an either-or choice. I think that the Armenian people want it all. They want good relations with all these actors.
And Matthew, we do remember what happened with Georgia when it started to have more pro-Western orientation. So if there is any specific cases Armenia should refer to avoid the repeating of the situation?
Well, first of all, it was a completely different situation. Georgia wanted to, the Georgian population overwhelmingly wanted to join NATO and the European Union. I have never heard literally anyone in Armenia ever say that they would like their country to join NATO or join the European Union. They want closer relations with the European Union. But NATO was the red line for President Putin, which led him to invade Georgia once and to invade Ukraine twice. Obviously, Russia doesn't really get a vote in this. It can try to intimidate and occupy countries if it doesn't want them to move toward NATO or the European Union. But what President Putin has done in Ukraine is an absolute catastrophe for Ukraine, but for Russia as well. For the over 500,000 Russian, largely men, who have been killed on the battlefield, for the Russian economy that is collapsing, and for President Putin himself. It's the biggest geopolitical defeat for Russia in modern history. And so President Putin wouldn't even dream, I think, of using force against Armenia. Russia can't succeed in doing that. It has failed in Ukraine, and it could never, I think, psychologically imagine using military force against Armenia under certain circumstances. That bond between Orthodox Christian Armenia and Orthodox Christian Russia is something that really means a great deal, I think, to President Putin. Yes, even though Georgia is Orthodox Christian, but again, Armenia is not asking for membership in NATO, which Georgia did.
Yeah, I do agree with you that when it comes to the NATO membership, there was not any official statement made by the government in Armenia. But when it comes to the European Union, Nikol Pashinyan himself stated that it's not going to follow all requirements the European Union is asking for, but still Armenia is willing to have more pro-European Union integration, even having the visa limitation regime with the European Union, if possible, how he says, within the next couple of years. Membership is possible, as it's being stated by the official government.
Yeah, I already said that Armenians seem to want to get closer to the European Union. Who on earth does not want visa-free travel to the European Union? Every Russian, I think, would love to have that opportunity. So I don't think that's any problem for Russia. And who cares if it is? The Armenian people have a right, just like Azerbaijani people have a right, to live in peace and in prosperity and to have strong relations with any country they wish to have strong relations with. That is none of Russia's business. And so I don't think, but I also know that, President Putin has repeatedly said that any country's desire, including Ukraine's, to get closer to the European Union, and even membership, he has said, that's not a problem for Russia. It's NATO that's the red line, and that's understandable.
Absolutely. So, Matthew, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining Inside Politics today.
Thanks, Anastasia. Great to be with you, as always.
Thank you. Well, Armenia's election may have provided political clarity at home, but many important questions remain for the wider region. From the future of the peace process and regional connectivity to the evolving geopolitical landscape of Eurasia, the South Caucasus is entering a period that could prove decisive for years to come. As tensions continue to reshape global trade, energy and security dynamics, the importance of stability, cooperation and connectivity across the region is only likely to grow. Thank you for joining us on Inside Politics, and I see you next time.